Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Halal Gap. I'm your host, Skandar Theek, and I'm joined, as always, by...
your other host, Sophia Alani.
And our talented producer, Asif. How's it going, man?
Yo, yo, yo.
Yo, 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 yo. We have an incredible guest for you guys today. Take it away, Sophia.
He is an actor, voiceover artist, musician, and podcast host. Along with his friend Bassem Osmani, he founded the Kominas and was featured in the documentary titled The Birth of Punk Islam, Taqwacore. You may have caught him as Mateo in season 1 of Rom-Com Pods or in 2020's Zoom theater production Guards at the Taj. He is also the host of the brand new Rifelion-produced podcast series King of the World, where he reflects on his own journey through addiction, identity, creativity, and what it means to be a Muslim in America post 9/11. Joining us all the way from Boston, please welcome Shahjehan Khan.
Woohoo!
Thank you so much. You got all the things. I don't have to say anything now.
Yeah, we could cut here. It's over. What more is there to say? So typically we just kind of start right at the beginning with your origin story. So do you want to tell us, take us back?
I would not be able to tell an origin story without the origin of my parents. So my father is from Quetta in Pakistan. My mom is from Lahore in Pakistan. Their parents decided that they should get married in 1979. They had met each other a week before that. My dad came to the U.S. in 74.
We heard that he left his suitcase in the UK when he came to America.
Yeah, I don't know. I forget exactly how much of that story was in the first episode of my show, but yeah, I mean, he like showed up to the shores of Boston, like the Charles River was like frozen. There was like a crazy blizzard that year. And just kind of like, I think a pretty typical sort of a story coming from, Quetta to come to like Boston. It's pretty wild.
Isn't it weird how our parents come to these like cold ass climates from Pakistan?
Yeah.
It's like, why wouldn't they all just gravitate towards tropical climate?
I was literally just at my parents' house last night and it's freezing inside. Like the AC is like full blast. And I was like, and we were having like Hyderabadi biryani and like all this really cool food. I just had a new nephew about a month ago. And so it was his akika to shave the hair off of his head. Yeah. And so, and every time I walk in and like, it'll be the same. My dad will be just like freezing in the corner and my mom will just be like, it's just too hot. I can't handle any of this.
It's wild. It's wild. I remember my dad used to be the exact same way where he would be like, max, I can go. He grew up in India, but he would, when we would visit family like Pakistan or India, he'd be like, max 1 week. That's all I can take. It's too hot over there. And it's like, how did you guys, how do you do that? You climatize so quick.
I don't know. My dad can rock like a cashmere sweater, or should I say cashmere? I don't know. Sweater in like the middle of the summer. Like he does not feel heat at all.
Amazing. Yeah, my dad's also similarly very, like me and my dad are very like always hot. So like in the winter time, like we don't have the heat on in our house. It's just, and my mom and sister are just freezing. But you can always put on more layers. You can't take off your skin.
Exactly
so I say tailor it to the hottest person.
That's
because
exactly what I say.
Right?
Yeah, because people are always like, oh, you live in Boston, it's really cold. I'm like, yeah, it is like, I guess there's like a week or two in the year where it's like pretty insane cold, but like you kind of get used to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like the seasons and stuff.
Or you just like find ways to cope. Yeah. Because Edmonton has been the coldest place on earth like a few times over the last several years.
So your dad comes to Boston. He got into it was for MIT, if I'm mistaken.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
To study electrical engineering. And my mom actually has a master's in political science, but and she actually got a full scholarship to go to UMass Amherst, but her parents were like, yeah, that's not happening.
Really?
You have to go marry. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, like she has actually two elder sisters, my two khalas, who are both pretty well-known like math professors in Pakistan. But like for my mom, they just wanted, and at most pretty much everybody in the extended family is still in Pakistan. I have one popo, one aunt and uncle that are in Vegas, and two cousins from them. But everybody else is still in Pakistan. And so I think for them, for my nani and nana, like it was just important for them to have some connection to America.
Your Nana was like a bit of a big deal too, wasn't he?
Yeah, man. He was a bit. So he was like my Bada Nana great grandfather. He has a stamp. He was like part of the original Pakistan Muslim League, like back. He was like friends with Qaeda-e-Azam. Yeah. So it's like pretty insane. But yeah, my Nana Malik Shaukat Ali was the mayor of Lahore in 1955.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right. And that definitely, I think in the first episode, I pretty much go right into how it was like pretty hard to like grow up in that shadow.
So, okay. So you're born in Foxborough, correct?
Foxborough with a B. With a B.
Foxborough.
Everybody confuses it with Foxborough.
Wow. Unbelievable. All right. I think that was Asif's first mistake all season. That's okay, though.
Yeah.
It's literally people in this state make the same mistake and have never heard of Boxborough. So don't worry, Asif.
Is it like very close to Boston or Cambridge or where?
It's like about a half hour, 40 minutes to the west. So not like super far, but it's not Boston, it's not. Yeah. I forget if it's technically part of like the quote greater Boston area, but it's far enough away. It's a small suburb. It's like, it's very close to like colonial America founding, where like the battles of Lexington and Concord took place, literally like the next town's over. So it has all of this like colonial shit happening in it. So
was that like a big part of like your education growing up there? Like, did you learn about all that like ad nauseam?
I mean, yeah, we definitely did. Ad nauseum is the perfect way to say it. I mean, our school mascot was the Colonials. That was literally the name of the sports team. Are
they still the Colonials? No, that seems maybe problematic.
This year, they just changed it. I think this year or last year because people were like, "Yeah, this kind of sucks." But to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't think about any of that shit when I was going there. Mm-hmm. I didn't. But it really wasn't until a lot later, and honestly, even a lot of like. While putting the show together, that I was thinking about how all these things have affected me long term. But yeah, Boxborough. So I mean, after I was like 2 when we moved there. My dad had finished school at MIT, and then we spent a couple of years just in that area in Cambridge and then Arlington, and then they moved out to Boxborough.
Growing up in a household with people who are very much into academia, I would assume, based on what you just told us about your parents, was it more of a traditional household of, focus on academia, or did you have an early passion towards music? How did that come about for you?
I mean, I credit my traditional, in the sense that, my parents wanted me to like do well in school. I mean, I don't know if that's not. Yeah, it might be traditional for some people. It's also not that big a deal. I feel like it gets made, like people are like, it happens a lot with, I don't know, quote unquote Asian parents where people use that stereotype. It basically just means like your parents want you to do well, and that's like fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But in terms of music, I actually credit my father for that. I mean, my earliest memories are, he was really into Qawwali, into Nusrat Khan, into ghazals, into like the singer Gugush from Iran, and also like Johnny Cash and Chuck Berry. So my love of music, I think, definitely comes from my father. And interestingly enough, I learned this at a certain point in the podcast as I'm interviewing my mom, that she actually always wanted to play. I'm going to give this away, but I'm just going to do it. She actually always wanted to play the guitar, and I didn't know this until this year that I interviewed her.
Wow,
which is f***ing wild. Whoa. So, but
are you gonna like do that with her?
Now she wants to take. I've been trying to encourage her to take singing lessons. Actually, my bandmate. Korno, he comes from a Bengali family. His mother is, his parents are both actually like also like biology professors and like really academically accomplished, but they're also like touring musicians. And his mom runs a school. She like runs a music school in Wayland, Massachusetts. So anyway, the plan, my mom always wanted to take singing lessons, and I'm trying to push her to do it. But I know that she's like, a little hesitant because she feels like it's a little bit too late. But I think she'll do it. I think I'm gonna. Maybe I should do
That's
one
very
with her.
cool.
I should probably do one.
Yeah,
that would be amazing.
And then like you could play the guitar and she could sing and you could do a little switcheroo. Like that'd be so lovely.
So she will, like, both of my parents will go to like mushairas, you know, and like they'll musical nights and like sing there. So, you know, with like the rest of the, you know, aunties and uncles and stuff. So, but yeah, so they're definitely the ones that push me into music. But I think, again, at least what I like, not as a profession, like, you know, we want you to do this. We want you to like be a good kid that like plays piano and like, you know,
has like a rounded education, but
extracurriculars,
but still goes down the academic.
But like, you know, go to Harvard or whatever.
Exactly. You've touched on it a couple of times that the podcast that you're referring to is a new podcast that you've launched called King of the World, which we'll definitely get into. I'm wondering though, as it relates to, and as you just mentioned, as it relates to kind of your preparation for this very personal journey that you take listeners through, that you've had to interview your mom, and you know, have you found that you're learning a lot more about your childhood through their eyes than you initially would have thought?
Oh my God, so much more. Like my mom, my dad, my sisters, Mariam and Nuna. I am learning. I mean, I knew that I was a selfish male, you know, eldest son. I mean, with a name like Shahjehan. I mean, you know. But in all seriousness, like just seeing kind of. I have some experience with it being a person in recovery. So I've been sober 10 years. I think maybe 2 or 3. Thank you. Maybe 2 or 3 years into sobriety. I did initially do the kind of 12-step journey. So I did do, and that when you go through it, it involves making amends and kind of like owning your side of the things that you've done and you know, narrowing the list down from like all the people you feel you have wronged over your life or that have maybe not just like that, but that have been impacted by that. You kind of like whittle it down to, all right, these are the people I should kind of, it would serve them to like, that I should do this. And it's not a purely selfish thing. So a part of that, the first few were with my family, like we actually sat down with them and we talked through some stuff. And I mean, the reason I bring that up now this early is just because it was at that point when I definitely started to learn a little bit more of like just what an effect like everything that was going on with me had on them. But I feel like now, almost, this must be 8 years later now that we did these interviews, I definitely like learned a lot more about their experiences with me, of me, and then in the context of like the whole post 9/11 thing. And my parents too, specifically. Yeah. And just some of their memories, which are detailed in a couple of the episodes where, you know, there's a couple of back and forths where I'm just like, holy shit, I didn't know, like I knew this happened, but I didn't know this other thing that you're saying happened. So yeah, absolutely.
No, that's it. You know what? It's one of those things where it's like being given that medium and that opportunity through that podcast journey that you're doing. It's a pretty interesting and like unique reflection that I don't think a lot of us get a chance to have, right? I'll speak for myself. Like I've never had that sort of opportunity to just sit down and like interview my parents about their lived experience. You know what I mean? Like
that's what I was.
It must be a pretty incredible thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Initially, when we were tossing around the idea of doing a 9/11 thing, I was like, part of me was like, I don't want to do anything about 9/11. We are so sick of talking about 9/11. This year. It's going to be all fucking 9/11 all the time. But I think just what you said there is exactly what I was hoping. And frankly, like that seems to be what's really like resonating with people. So
yeah, right on. Good stuff. Cool. So, okay. So you're in Boxborough, not Foxborough. Yeah. And around age 12 or 13, I assume you get your first guitar. Was that like love at first sight, or was that?
Yes. So I didn't. Obviously, you don't have time to go into everything in the podcast form, but technically, or maybe I did. I don't know. First guitar my dad brings home is from a church garage sale. It's like a $12 shitty acoustic where, you know, it's a nylon string guitar, but someone put steel strings on it. So the action on the neck is all f***ed up. but that's what I like. And I was psyched. And that's like what I learned on, for the first year. I think I just had all of the strings as the same note or different octaves or whatever.
That's awesome.
Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I remember
Amazing.
this kid from elementary school. I still remember his name, Ben Hood. Had the thing that I was super jealous of was his guitar. He had a purple, I think it was called an Epiphone Coronet, and he had a little PV amp. And I remember sometimes he would let me come over and like I would just like, just like hit a couple of strings and turn on the little distortion switch on it, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I remember learning how to tune the guitar for the first time. I remember, and then discovering, oh my God, there's this thing called the power chord. Now I can play all the stuff that I like am hearing. So yeah, I people remember lots of of their firsts and stuff. Like for me, guitar firsts are just like vivid. So eventually the first electric guitar, I get very excited when I talk about guitars, sorry, was a Riz, a Squire Strat. So
okay,
anyway.
Nice. So I was just going to say, like, so in terms of like your early, like you're saying, like now I can play the things I'm hearing, like what were your kind of early influences? Was it punk, like from the beginning?
No, not at all. Punk, not at all. So I didn't get into punk until basically the Kominas started, thanks to Basim. But I'm talking like, I guess, Green Day. I can argue with somebody whether or not they're real punk or whatever. Definitely Green Day, Bush, Janoon.
Wait, what would be your opinion on that Green Day argument?
I mean, I don't care, man. I think, like they were, whatever. Like they were punk and they played Gilman Street and all that. And then they went a little pop punk and then they did all these other anthemic things. And like, I don't know. I think Green Day is awesome. I don't care.
I love it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm on board.
I'm on board.
I saw them when I was 16.
Me too. Like, that was one of my first like
they
amazing.
Set their whole stage on fire at the end of the show. I will never forget. It was the WBCN River Rave. I was 16.
That's incredible.
And it was, like at 3 p.m. It's a giant festival. It was like Coldplay, Marilyn Manson, Aerosmith, System of a Down, all these incredible bands.
Nice.
And Green Day just was like, you know what? We're just going to set all our shit on fire. So.
Were they the last act, or were they just sorry, next people? Like,
and it was 3 p.m. It was 3 p.m. They were like, there was tons of acts that were going to come after them.
They're like, nope, not today.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, Green Day. Then, I mean, a big thing for me was the whole, I guess, representation and music thing, other than Tony from No Doubt being like, wait, is that a brown dude? Is that a brown dude?
Yeah.
I think all of us were like, yo, that music video, like, I think in the back,
like, what is she wearing? A bindi? What? So but then it became, so then I a big sort of a life-changing thing for me was when one of our I guess I would technically call him Shahzad uncle, but Shahzad bhai is more accurate. He gave me a cassette tape of the band Vital Signs from Pakistan. And then from there, when Salman of Vital Signs album 1 split off and started this band Janoon, those were like life-altering periods of time. This is probably like like 91, 92 or something when Janoon first came about. So for me, it was like, wait a minute. Pakistani dudes can like play guitar and sort of be like guitar heroes. Like, what is even going on? And then they were technically one of my first concerts in Pakistan at Al Hamra Open Air Stadium in Lahore. So yeah, I can still play every Janoon song ever, like that they ever wrote.
How old were you for your first concert?
That must have been, I would have been, I think, 13 or 14. Technically, my first ever concert was Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan with my dad in 1995 at the Boston Pops. And I always tell the story. My dad was the only person in the whole, like, it's at Boston Symphony Hall, which is like one of the esteemed places with like perfect acoustics, right? The engineers probably know what they're doing. My dad goes up to the sound engineer in the middle of the show, and he's like, could you just maybe turn some frequency down? Like,
oh my goodness!
Say, like, turn it down. Awesome. Could you maybe bring down like the 1K or the 2K? Because my dad is like, He's a music aficionado.
He knows his shit.
He knows
I like
what's
it.
up. Yeah.
He does. Yeah. Janoon. So definitely Janoon,
So
Jimi
funny.
Hendrix. And then Rage Against the Machine was then the next significant, and Tom Morello specifically of Rage Against the Machine was the person that I idolized in terms of bought all the same guitar pedals. I eventually got a guitar with like a Floyd Rose tremolo on it. And I hung my strings in the same way. And I just like wanted to be him. And so those were kind of the things I was imitating.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And then was your first band the high school band that did Weezer covers? Was
that is correct. We were called Protocol.
Okay.
It was me and my friends Eric and Kevin and Chris and Jay for a couple of shows. He rapped a little bit, and then that was kind of that was kind of it. But yeah.
And was that when you first got your taste of like a stage experience and kind of
not exactly. Actually, my first taste would have been being asked to perform at the Pakistani Association of Greater Boston's events, like
talent show or what?
Pakistan Independence Day talent show. I would play the national anthem. There's video evidence of this somewhere. And like pretty big shows actually, because like those things are huge. Yeah. So, but in terms of like being in a band, definitely, Protocol. I remember our first show was, it was like one of those very shady talent shows that some guy just offers some high school kids like, oh, you just pay me for these tickets and then you sell them. And if you win this competition, I'll give you 10 hours of free recording time, which is literally a little 4-track recorder like in my basement. So that was like our first show. Like our parents bought all the tickets and stuff, but
that's great.
It was like my first time playing through somebody else's like Marshall stack and stuff. And so we quickly, I think, became, I'm going to argue that we were the best band at Acton Boxborough Regional High School. I think we were pretty popular. I think we were pretty right on with our Weezer, Incubus, Tool covers.
Those. That's a pretty. I mean, if you're doing everything from Tool to Weezer, that's a fairly eclectic.
Weezer, Incubus, Perfect Circle. Also, we did definitely Rage covers. We had a few originals. I can send them to you if you want to hear them.
Please do. Please do.
Absolutely.
I would go. Yes, I mean, if that's like my playlist right now. Like Rage, Incubus, all these 2000s and like late 90s bands. Yeah, that's
because that shit's all coming back. It's so funny. I'm a big brother in the Big Brother and Big Sisters program. I went with my little brother to see Slipknot 2 years ago before COVID because he was like into Slipknot, and I was like, this is
that's
incredible.
What's old is new again, I guess.
Yeah,
that's wicked. But sorry, before I move on, I just wanted to ask actually. So were you self-taught like the entire time, or did you?
Yes, guitar. I was self-taught. Piano. I took pretty intense lessons for 8 years, and I basically dropped out because I just didn't want to do it anymore. Once I started playing guitar, I just thought guitar was cooler. Which, in retrospect, I kind of wish I had kept going. But no, guitar. I taught myself through guitar tabs. And just mimicking. I did. Eventually, I took 4 guitar lessons, but I just didn't care about all the modes and the this and the that. I just was like, you know what? I know like what I want to do. Let me just figure it out. So yeah.
So I feel like if you do it from like a passion perspective rather than like a theoretical perspective, like you could probably buy in a lot more too, right? Like you're probably willing to put in the hours because nobody's like
it's
go
just so natural.
learn.
I mean,
use it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's value in both, for sure. But I do feel like that's the thing that maybe piano is the thing that developed my ear, and then once I took on guitar and, I can play drums a little bit. I can play bass a little bit. I started playing rubab a couple of years ago, which is from Afghanistan traditionally.
Maybe I'm just speaking from my own trauma of having to learn like green sleeves on sheet music for my acoustic guitar that like translated into like no further development of my guitar skills.
The only thing I can still play on piano, like from memory, honestly, is actually I just got a harmonium. So I started playing harmonium, which is really fun. But the only thing I can still play from memory is not something I learned from my piano teacher. It's Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness from Smashing Pumpkins, like the self-titled, the title of that album, that opening piano track. It's one of my favorite pieces of music ever. So,
that's cool.
Nice. And so, given that you kind of like grew up with like this music going on, and that you had all these opportunities as like a youth to kind of like show off your skills, and had parents that, you know, bought your tickets and supported you, and had like, you know, a Pakistani association that was like, hey, come play for us. Like, did you find that support translated to kind of you doing this as like a job and less of just like on the side as a student?
So, you know, that's a really, really interesting question that I haven't specifically ever thought about in that context. But I wish I could say yes. I think the other side of everything was that now I don't know what came first. You know, a lot of kids are anxious and depressed, you know, growing up and stuff, and maybe feel a lack of self-worth. You know, a lot of this is just like being a young person, you know, but I think for me it was actually pretty hard to either like internalize because I did have a lot of love, you know, I had a lot of love for my family. There was actually a Pakistani community there, but for some reason the disconnect between the like school me and and like the Desi me, or like whatever that meant to me, like those two things just didn't they didn't like click. And I just always, and I felt, again, a very common story with, I think, like, you know, whatever the term is, like first generation or third culture kids or whatever, like for me, and also being in a very, very white town, whiteness being the norm, and being the, like, I think from teenage years onwards, kind of like being this Desi kid on the weekends, and also maybe starting to drift away from, at least in my experience, and I'm only talking about mine, you know, like what the other like Desi kids around me were doing. Like they weren't really, at least again for me, into like the kind of stuff that I was into, especially like, and yeah. So I mean, in that sense, I guess, yeah, when you put it like that, it should have made it easier, right, for me to like, especially because, like, you know, it then turned out, for example, that like the dude from Janoon, his like sister lived in Boston, and I got to like know that, and then but it still was like, it wasn't something that I realistically, even for myself, saw as something I could pursue, other than just this like crazy sort of dream that I had, you know. And it was, all of this stuff was kind of going in conjunction with like starting to smoke a shitload of weed, which again is not by any means unusual, but for me it just became an identity like really quickly, just like excessive to the point where it would even like get in the way of, you know, protocols, band practice, you know, like not being able to show up for stuff.
Do you think that like with the divide, and I know you kind of mentioned like you don't really know what came first, but like do you think that like the divide, you kind of sensed it, that there's like a profound difference here, and so like that kind of led to more distance, more drug use and stuff? Or was it that like that happened first and then that ended up exacerbating the divide? You know what I mean?
You know, so my mom actually tells the story in the opening of the podcast, not just on the podcast, but like I've heard this story my whole life, that when I was in kindergarten, you know, one day I came home and I was like trying to ask her to like wash my hands to make them white. So if I look at it from that perspective, then this is something I would have noticed from way, way, way back in the day, from in kindergarten, right? And especially being basically one of maybe two or three brown kids in the whole town at that time. I mean, now it's changed a little bit, but definitely back then. I don't know, and you know, going from that, like whether that fed into me sort of having a predisposition towards anxiety and depression and stuff, you know, like it's hard to say. I know that my parents did try I think to put me in therapy once when I was in either middle school or early high school, it didn't really stick, and we just kind of stopped it after that, because it just seemed that I was like sad, and I think that around, like, especially right before high school, right before I started smoking weed anyway, like I was already kind of like depressed, and I didn't have a lot of self-confidence really in anything, like in any real part of myself, like obviously, like I enjoyed being in my room, being alone, and like playing guitar. And I think outwardly, yeah, like I had some friends here and there, but like inside, like at home, at night, like I just didn't like feel like I was like a complete, person. Or I just felt like there was like something just missing about me, I'm not sure if that's like the identity piece. I'm not sure if that's like the what am I going to do later in life piece, or or if I'm just supposed to be something that I'm incapable of being. But I think all of that like was definitely there.
So after high school, you did pursue a college degree, but then left.
Barely.
Left. So did you kind of did you go because your parents were saying, "Look, we want you to go get something," or did you kind of just?
Dude,
was music on the radar? Like, where was your head at that point?
Honestly, I was pretty high every day from, I would say, end of sophomore year through senior year. My dad literally wrote my college application essay for me. He actually wrote it about moderation in Islam.
Oh wow!
And I was like, okay, this sounds good. I guess. And then I got into UMass Amherst and Northeastern. I had applied to 10 schools that he wanted me to apply to. Like Tufts. I remember going on an interview with like this person from Tufts, and she was asking me all these questions that I guess like they ask smart kids, and I just was like, I had literally just like smoked a cigarette outside. I remember it was a Starbucks in Concord, and I couldn't have given like two about being there. But no, so I mean, I barely graduated high school. That's the truth. I mean, I was like, I looked up my transcript for this podcast, and there's F's like all over the place. There's D's. I failed gym. Like I was that kid.
Actually,
because
impressive.
I didn't go. It's impressive, but it's I mean, I just was so like checked out, emotionally and with the cannabis and stuff, and like But yeah, so I mean, I ended up at UMass Amherst. I barely lasted half a semester, and that's kind of when I came home and really told my parents what was going on. Where I was like, look, I wake up every day, I get high, I can't even eat without getting high. I can't leave my room. And yeah, so I mean, dropped out.
So what was their reaction to that? Like, were they aware at all that was
they
happening?
had been aware for a couple of years that I was like getting high. So I mean, it's kind of not to bring too much humor into a very serious topic, but the first time my parents found out I got high, I threw a giant party at their house, and not like they didn't go away for the weekend. They went to a different town for the night, to like a shadi or something, in like Framingham, Massachusetts. And I called, like, what happens in high school. You tell 8 people, they tell 10 people, and then 50 people showed up to my parents, house, and they came back early because my mom wasn't feeling well. And I was, so that's kind of where they figured out that, oh, this is like what I'm doing. But my dad, being the kind person that he is, the next day, instead of like grounding me, he made me a binder, like a printout binder about the negative effects of marijuana, and he trusted that I would like give the weed back to the drug dealer from whom So I'm just giving you some, my parents have never smoked a cigarette. They have never done anything bad, and so they didn't come from a time or a place where I think they were ready to have any sorts of conversations like these. And it was just kind of like, but right away, we talked to my primary care doctor. Then I got a therapist. We tried a couple of things, and he put me on some medication and stuff. And I started seeing this therapist. I think that was around the time I first started maybe going to meetings, but it was still weird because I was like, wait, why am I at these meetings? I just smoked some weed, because I thought for me that I was just like, I can't possibly be, I'm not like an opiate user. Like I can't have an addiction
Right.
problem or whatever. So I just was like, this is whatever. Um, but yeah, they I think like, sorry, they heard me, they were terrified, and we quietly suffered with this as a family for many years. I think until it wasn't until later that they, I think, even started to open up to their friends about like what was going on.
And was this around the time that you reconnected with Basim, who
So
you would
it
later
was a couple of years before that. So I
Okay.
reconnected with Basim probably, so that would have been 2004. So I just turned 21. The first attempts at college were around 18, 19. So I was
Okay.
18. I turned 18 a month after 9/11. My birthday's in October. So it was a couple of years of trying to like go to a different, like a local school, like a commuter college, UMass Lowell instead of Amherst, which is closer to where we grew up, and kind of like staying whatever clean, or not getting high for a little while, and then talking to this therapist, and then taking some classes, and then just doing the whole cycle again and dropping out. And then, so yeah, it was a few years later that I reconnected with Basim, and we kind of like tossed around the idea of playing some music together. So,
And was that so? Okay, so now we're obviously Basim being your co-founder for the Kominas. So was that like a just kind of like an organic thing that developed that you guys were just jamming, and then you're like, hey, maybe we should put a name to this and do some
honestly,
shows? Or
Basim, like just had this idea. Like he already had been in this amazing, I guess, a goth punk band called Malice in Leatherland. They had already done some touring and stuff, and he kind of like him and I. Yeah, so we first met way back in the day at Sunday school with another guest that you had on this show last week, my childhood friend Abdullah Saeed, and we all kind of met at the masjid when we were like 14 or 15. When Abdullah was living in Massachusetts for a little bit, but then we all sort of lost touch, and Basim kind of like he was the kind of like a punk kid, a goth kid and stuff in high school. So he had started this band. He had already kind of like toured with this band a little bit. So when he kind of came back into my life or whatever, actually, you know what? I think I saw him. I actually saw him. So the year that I dropped out of UMass Amherst, my dad took me to see Dream Theater, that prog rock band Dream Theater. So those first few weekends I was at UMass Amherst, and Basim was outside of that concert in his leather jacket, his purple shirt, smoking a clove cigarette. And I remember he had his like ponytail with like his strand of hair, and he just was smoking the cigarette. And I remember saying hi to him, being like, "Hey, man!" And my dad obviously took me to the concert. Basim was cool, came with his friends. I was a loser there with my dad or whatever, or so I thought at the time. I mean, in retrospect, my dad took me to
that's like
Dream Theater concert.
dope, to be honest.
So, but we got back in the car, and my dad, I remember the one thing he said was, "It didn't look like he was smoking the right kind of cigarette." That's what I remember. So I'm sorry, I just threw that in there. It's random. It's neither here nor there.
No, that's amazing.
That was technically the first time I saw Basim.
So Asif, your research is correct. That was the first time you reconnected with Basim after.
Yeah, you're right. Wow.
He knows you better than you know you.
Yeah, exactly. It was, I guess, so yeah, it was a couple of years later when we both were at UMass Lowell, both having dropped out of college, that he walked into the library and, the connection was made. And very soon he was like, yeah, I'm doing this other band, but I want to do something that's focused on, identity, on maybe some, just something a little bit different. And that's kind of where the idea, and he had the name Kominas was his idea. And so he kind of had like, it is, it's a awesome name.
Awesome.
So is Malice in Leatherland, but I think in terms of the kind of band we would later become, it's still the perfect name.
So on that point, obviously with the name like Kominas, you kind of are making a statement, and then B, obviously you're going to have some sort of South Asian type influence, right? Being a Urdu, Hindi, type of a name. Was the intention from day one to be a certain type of band, i.e., that kind of fusion between South Asian influence and, you know, rock, punk rock, or was it more to be, hey, we just like this name and we're going to make music and then whatever comes of it comes of it?
I think that it was sort of like is confluence the right word of like being who we were at that time. So 2004, 2005, war on terror, Iraq war, 3 years after 9/11, all the shit is going on. And of course that's the shit that is like first on your mind, you know? And so I think we very intentionally had stuff that we wanted to talk about. I think what ended up happening sort of a little bit out of our control was that we sort of became these like Muslim punk, you know, whatever. I don't want to say heroes, but like the word is escaping.
Icon.
Icon,
Sure.
I would say.
Like the model. You were like
trailblazers.
Yeah, trailblazers.
Right. So as if we're the first people that are saying stuff like this, which is not really true. But in terms of, it made a very sort of good media story. It's not that it wasn't like, I think, so it's been we've been a band now for almost 16 years. And I think in retrospect, like by this point, like I'm cool with it, you know, like I'm cool with how people found out about us and about I'm cool with how people found out about us and stuff. But it was tough. It's all, you know, we're not the only band in the world that has ever had a problem with like being labeled, right? So it's not like something that is just unique to us. But one thing that happened sort of right away was being this kind of like a lot was put on us, you know, like I think now we have all these conversations about representation, right? About who's the seats at the table and stuff. And like, and you know, things look a lot different in 2021 for whatever, you know, a brown creator, a Muslim creator, a creator of color, a musician of color, than they did in 2000 or you know, I don't want to say, but like people that were in like quote unquote pop culture. So back then we didn't even have like an album before we had a review in Rolling Stone magazine. You know, we didn't even have a record fully done before there were featured articles about us in like papers like all over the world. And it was like, yeah, man, it was really cool, but it was like a lot and it was like too much, like right away. And I think that we were figuring out the answer to the question that you originally kind of asked me, right? Like as it was happening in real time. So that was kind of the challenge. And like that film, right? That like, yeah, it captures this moment in time and yeah, all those things happen, but it's just like it tells like one thing and it almost like exists within itself and it creates itself. And then before you know it, like half the bands have broken up and, you know, the scene was kind of like, or like if it was a scene, it was stuff that we all kind of were friends and did on our own. And we had our little like MySpace and live journal groups and stuff. But like before we were all kind of figuring each other out, like people were like writing about us, like academics were writing about us, you know, and it was like, it was crazy. So yeah, it's weird also to talk about it in the past tense because we still exist. We just played a show on Friday,
right?
And we still grapple with a lot of these issues, right? Having non-Muslims in the band almost since its inception, non-Pakistanis. If you go to the Wikipedia page right now, I think it still says, you know, it doesn't credit our like non-Pakistani members and stuff, and like, so it's weird, man. It's weird being a band that started also kind of what sort of right when social media was like becoming a thing as to like as opposed to like what it is now. But I like to think that we have definitely like, because, and I know this because people have told us how important we were to them and stuff. And like, I'm really proud of like the stuff that we've done. I just think it's like, I sometimes feel like I need to say kind of all the other stuff that happened. And I was also dealing with a lot of my own shit at the time, like mental health stuff and addiction and all these crazy things.
And so in that vein of like the representation piece, like, because you kind of mentioned that like it it had an impact on you as a child to like not see yourself represented, and that was part of the struggle with identity. And so I'm wondering, like, when you kind of made this band, and I realize that you just explained how you guys were kind of like put in a box and you didn't really have a lot of freedom to say like, this is who we want to be, this is what we want to do, this is the kind of impact that we want to have, as much as you would have liked. But I wonder, like, how much of that representation was almost like for yourself as much as for other people, to be able to be like this is who, like, I can be this, like we can be this, like there's no.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I mean the thing that happened almost right away was we found all the other kids like us, right? Like we started playing shows and like meeting all the people that I wished that I was friends with growing up, so that maybe I wouldn't have had that hard of a time. So, I mean, in that sense, yeah, it was deliberately like to stay sane, and to like a self-care thing or whatever of sorts. And that was the coolest part about, and still is the coolest part about our band, I think, is that it's not just like going to see a show. Like, look, we're not some big famous, band. We have our indie thing, we're not on like a big label or whatever, but like anytime we go anywhere we play, there's a little bit of a built-in audience. People come, they hang with you after, you go get food, you hang out. And it's not just like, I don't know how to describe this, but it's not just like hanging out with like a band after a show. It's like you build meaningful connections. And I've built kind of like lasting friendships with people all over the world that to this day, I can go to not any, but I can go to a lot of cities and just like link up with somebody that was part of this really, really something super special, both for me and them, and it connected us and forever kind of like cemented our relationship in time. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, it was absolutely a selfish, and I mean, like, I think like,
but and I wonder what you think about this. Like, in that regard, then, is all art not selfish, or is that kind of selfishness not like an actually a really good thing?
That doesn't mean it's not necessary, right? Like, for sure.
No,
I mean,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I think all art comes from I think, I don't want to say all art. Maybe I can just say my art, or art that I've been a part of. But yeah, it comes from trying to figure out your place in the world, and whether the selfish portion of that is trying to leave some kind of an impact. We could probably talk about the degree of selfishness or narcissism or whatever. Like, yeah, I mean, it's cool to like hold a guitar and like jump around on stage and stuff. That stuff is really fun. But at the same time, like, that's the most normal I ever feel, It's like, so what does that mean? And don't I deserve that? And I know that the energy that comes from that and fulfill something else in people, just on Friday. So we had our first gig after 2 years because of COVID, basically. And, it was a hometown show. Well, hometown for me and Basim. Well, for three of us in the band, me, Basim, and Karna were from the Boston area. Hassan Sunny is from Philly. We were playing this kind of local underground indie festival, and just people from all walks of life, but also like all stages of the Kominas career were there. Like people that were literally at the first show we ever did, to like the work friends that I quit my full-time job 3 years ago to like do creative stuff more. Like, they came, like people from like my life in recovery came, like, and it was an amazing reminder of, and especially because I've been on this like journey with my show or whatever. It was just amazing to kind of see like all of those people at the same time. And also just because I hadn't done hadn't had a gig with Kominas in a couple of years. So it was a reminder of, I think, exactly like what you're saying, that like, yeah, this is a thing that I do for myself, but it also like means something to people. And that's special. I think that's something that maybe not all bands get to do in that way. Certainly, every kid that wants to like be in a band growing up, like, they don't get to necessarily do the kinds of the things that we've done. So,
early, well, I guess, relatively early in the Kominas life, you and Basim decided to move to Pakistan for a period. What motivated What motivated that decision?
So technically, Basim left because I couldn't get my shit together. So
Okay.
Basim graduated from college, and he got a job offer at a news channel in Pakistan to pursue his other passion, which is journalism. And around that, so this would have been 2007. So we had just done the first big tour, which is I think which is the first half of that documentary.
Right.
And at the end of that, I kind of like fell back into like addiction stuff, and I stopped showing up for gigs and things like that. And he kind of like was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen with this thing, so I'm just going to go to Pakistan. And I stayed back, kind of did whatever for a bit, but I did manage to get our first album mixed, our first album, which was called Wild Nights in Guantanamo Bay. And then in early 2008, I took a trip also to Pakistan that year. My dadi had passed away and stuff. And then Boston basically was like, yo, why don't you come out here? Because I feel like there's something we can do musically here that we were sort of maybe trying to do some of with the Kominas in the US, but maybe we could start like a new band out here. Why don't you just come? Like, you're clearly like not doing okay. Just come over here. Like, so that's, it wasn't like a mutual, it was literally like he went and I was like, oh man, that looks cool. Maybe I'll follow you. So that's kind of how we both ended up there.
Did you feel comfortable there? Like, did you grow up visiting Pakistan a lot?
So I grew up going. Yeah, I mean, I grew up going all the time, every couple of years, but with family, right? So I didn't really know Pakistan outside of family life and shadis and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't. I think I was a senior or a junior in high school when I took my first trip by myself, and I did mostly was family, but I spent like one night getting high with people, and I was like, oh shit, you can do this here. And I mean, obviously you can do that there. That's like where this shit comes from. But like that was my first like kind of like being a teenager or whatever, or a young person, a young adult in Pakistan. But so after that, like a few years later, 2008 was my first like I went to Pakistan. Basim picked me up from the airport instead of my family like they normally would, and we had an apartment. Tried, and that's kind of, but yeah, I definitely like, I was very, very familiar. I grew up speaking Urdu, decent amount of Punjabi too. So it wasn't like complete culture shock by any means.
Okay. Yeah. And that's when you guys started Noble Drew, right? You decided not to call it.
Yes, you have done your research. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason you guys decided not to call it the Kominas, I mean, I assume a part of it is because it was just the two of you and not the entire band. But was there other reasoning behind that, or? Yeah,
so I mean, it was pretty deliberate. So Noble Drew Ali, that comes from, we had a pretty deep interest in the Nation of Islam in the U.S. and reading a lot of that history and stuff. But not using the Kominas was also kind of a safety and security thing because our antics had found their way into the press in Pakistan. And the interesting thing there was that people there thought we were kind of this caricature that was making fun of Islam in the US. And that's how we realized very quickly that that's how it was being positioned, in the West, quote unquote. It was we're this like antidote to like all the problems with the Muslim world. We're the cool punk Muslims, and this could only happen in the West. Very like Orientalist way of looking at the world.
Right.
We get to Pakistan and we realize that has turned into us. Oh, these guys are blaspheming against like the Prophet and stuff. And again, it wasn't like the very small like elite circle of people that read English language newspapers or whatever. So I don't want to say that we like everybody knew who we were by any stretch of the imagination, but it was enough to kind of be like, maybe we don't want to be this band here. Maybe we want to do something else.
Turn the heat down a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that's something that I'm wondering, because it's not something that you didn't struggle with, double negative, but it's something you struggled with as well, I would assume, here in like North America too. I mean, I remember seeing a YouTube clip of you guys having an argument with an imam. I don't know where, but just about how he, you know, the idea of you guys doing something that in his interpretation was haram, right? And having this label of, you know, and again, so two questions that come out of this. One, you know, what knowing that you guys yourselves are just trying to do something creative while also living your lives as Muslims or as individuals or as, you know, non-Muslims or whoever was in that group, how did it feel to have to answer to this broader, you know, this label that was being placed upon you guys as like this quote unquote Muslim punk rock band or like Taqwacore? Like what was that something that you guys embraced, or was that something that you felt uncomfortable about? So that would be my first question. And then the second part of that was when you kind of came into Pakistan, and you saw, you know, you're facing this idea of you guys being being presented as somewhat blasphemous. You know, what was that something that then shaped the way that you guys decided to write music with Noble Drew as well, or was it just let's just get under the radar a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of your first question, yeah, it was not easy. It caused a lot of friction right away, you know, in terms of like which band members got asked questions in interviews, right? It was pretty much only the Muslim band members that people wanted to talk to. So yeah, it sucked, to be perfectly honest with you. It was really, really tough in the beginning. I think it's only now that we have not been able to like solve that problem, but just understand it on a bit of a deeper level in terms. And now, honestly, we get to talk to like a lot less white journalists. I don't want to just, you know what I mean?
No, I was just going to say it's an interesting dynamic because we've spoken to, you know, obviously a lot of Muslim artists and all sorts of different creative endeavors. And, you know, we were talking to Danish Makbul not too long ago, who's like an up and coming comedian. And he was talking about how him being Muslim has like been an amazing in with the kind of the comedy world, because now he can do like these MSA shows and like ISNA conventions and like gets in through Rami and like all these guys who just give him a leg up because he is a fellow Muslim community. You guys, like you mentioned, were trailblazers in like quote unquote, like, again, without trying to label you guys, but within this like South Asian sort of like Muslim membered punk rock band, right? So it's not like you were already in an ecosystem which you could then leverage by being South Asian or by being Muslim. You guys were like literally paving the way. But was there ever an opportunity for you guys to leverage that in a positive way? Like, were you guys able to advance the Kominas because, like, you know, because you guys were so unique and so like able to leverage that publicity? Do you think that it helped in any way, or was it strictly something that you're like, man, I do not want this label?
No, look, I mean, of course it helped. I mean, it's the reason we played these festivals that we had no business playing. You know what I mean? Like Bassem made this joke that he was like, people were asking us like, how are you doing this without a manager, like with just your Gmail account? How are you getting invited to play these festivals all over the world? You know, so yeah, for sure. I mean, it helped us like in that sense. I think one big sort of internal shout out that we got that helped us a lot was DJ Rekha in New York. She's a really, really dear friend of mine, but she was, I would say, the first quote unquote brown or Desi or South Asian, you know, big influence in the world to like let us play her basement Bhangra party, to invite us to do that. And once we did that, that was kind of our in to a different sort of like community there. So I think that even though all of these struggles were going on, like we were still a band, you know, that was like writing songs. We actually have 5 albums now. So that was the other thing, which was interesting, like because the first album got so much publicity. And then I think after that in 2015, our album Stereotype got, I think, a lot of publicity also. People sort of forget that there were like albums in between those two. So this whole, I mean, there was content was being produced, you know. But yeah, what was your second question?
Oh, way back in the day, yeah. That was more about with Noble Drew, right? If you guys also wanted to change sort of the type of music you're making.
So I think for example, for me, like I don't write lyrics. So in terms of the lyrical content of the music, I know Basim, even on Kominas' second album, he was trying to get better at Punjabi. So when when we eventually got to Pakistan, he wanted to kind of immerse himself in everyday like working class struggles of like the average Pakistani. So, you know, we had just a song about like the bullshit people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, like not having power half the day, like load shedding as it's called. So yeah, there was definitely, well, I think one thing we quickly realized there also was that like, we were kind of outsiders there, you know, like we just sort of showed up and we were like, it's one thing to like be, you know, a MySpace punk band. Maybe that's what I'll call us now. We're a MySpace punk band, a MySpace punk band in the US, where, you know, you sort of understand the system, quote unquote, I guess, and then show up in Pakistan. I remember the first night, like we were with a couple of like pretty prominent artists and we were like talking shit about like Coke Studio or whatever, right? And being like, oh, well, you know, corporate, it's all bullshit. Like you guys should just start your own thing. And they're like, dude, do you know how hard it is to put on a concert in this country right now? Like, do you understand that there are no labels here? So like all you can do is like, and these companies like pay artists and stuff. And so it was just interesting to like, yeah, to try and understand that world and then realize that, hey, maybe we don't know what the we're talking about. So maybe we should step back for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so also just like having kind of that dual, like holding that dual position, it's almost like you have like double the criticism to deal with like than just like a other punk band, because it's almost like you have like the music and like criticism of like the music from like the punk community that are like, are you a good punk band or not? And then you have like the criticism from like the Muslim community being like, are you good Muslims or not? Are you good?
Dude,
Muslim
I'm telling you, we had like academics. There are people that literally did their dissertations in college on our band. And I'm not kidding. There are like people published books and stuff, and like it was so much. Yeah, I don't even know where to. I mean, yes,
and so
yes.
like was one of those voices louder, and like how did you manage that?
Was one of which voices louder?
Like, was it like the punk, like were you accepted by the punk community, or was there ever any criticism about like the music, or was that like fine and it was mostly just like other Muslims who were like, yo, we have things to say?
No, I think the criticism was more, and I think this maybe, now that I'm thinking of it, is a social media thing, is more about like, obviously as an artist, you're always maybe going to think about like, how am I presenting myself? How am I being represented, this and that? But I don't think the music, like seeing us live, like there was no issue with us as a live band. So I think that we always knew that we had the musical chops. I think that one thing that became hard was that we always wondered if it like was about, like, was the music even important? Was it more, Basim talks about this a lot, but like, is it just the idea that I exist that's important? You know, the fact, like, or is what I'm doing actually important? Or is it that the fact that I exist, is that all that really matters? I think the cool thing now is 15, 16 years later, I think we have been, and I think our live shows have gotten a lot better. We've become a lot better as musicians. So we've been able to kind of like, we know that we're like good enough ourselves, you know, it doesn't like, and what I was trying to allude to earlier was that like, it's okay if we check this box for this person, if we check this box for this person, in the same way as like, it's okay to be like both an American, be a Pakistani, be all these things, because we like have a stronger sense of who we are. Which is, I think that's something that you're constantly redefining for yourself. It's not really something that is ever like finished at least not for me. But I do think that with time and, age, like some of that stuff like resolves itself a little bit, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We touched on, like, for the band, for the Kominas, this like duality between, trying to, straddling between these two worlds. For you personally at that time, you actually touched on this in your first episode of King of the World, about how, you were having some internal conflict as well, as it relates to balancing your actions, outside of the music, even with your faith. And was that something that was that a driving force behind you deciding to then take a break from
No, I
music?
took a break to get sober. I
Yeah.
took a break because I was completely out of control, and I was in a really rough spot. So that's the reason I left the band for 4 years, was just to legit get sober. But that being said, the faith thing, I think one thing the Kominas and all this Muslim punk media stuff did was it did allow me to realize that, like, there are many ways to be, like, one thing I think I say in the show as well is just like, 9/11 made it so that being a Muslim is all of a sudden the most important part of who I am, right? Like, in the world. So with that, a few years later, then realizing that, like, okay, well, maybe there isn't just, like, I have this narrow idea of what is a Muslim. It's a Pakistani, like, my idea of it relates to being, Pakistani, being upper middle class, going to like the one mosque that I went to, like having, so that's kind of like my narrow idea of what it means to be Muslim, which is completely like leaves out, the rest of the world. But like, I think that the faith stuff, I struggled a lot with it. Definitely those first few years in AA, just because, again, like, not knowing that, like, one of the largest communities in Narcotics Anonymous is in Iran. Like, in the back of the NA textbook, there are literally chapters written by indigenous folks, by Muslim folks, by a Sikh person, by, like, also by someone on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, and like, so. Sorry, I like completely lost the question that you asked me.
No, I was just asking about the challenges, or the struggles, I guess, you would had between your faith as well as, the actions that you were going through being part of the band, and then later as to whether or not that was a driving force behind you having to take a break. But
okay, yeah. So I mean, and then I said, I mean, the break literally was sobriety,
right.
but intertwined in that always is the faith.
Right.
I think that, it was, and then through getting sober, I, definitely became more okay with just sort of being on that constant, like, journey part of it, not to, like, be too much of that kind of a person, I guess. But like, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, it's getting sober helped me realize where I fit in my idea, and just like I don't have to hide. Like, one thing I would do a lot is I would say, like, oh, I grew up Muslim, when people would ask me if I was Muslim, just because I just didn't feel right saying it, even with the Kominas and stuff, like, and for, being in that band, it was easy to hide behind this character a lot, like, to be like, yeah, I'm in this, like, for those first couple of years, like, I'm in this band, and I'm like this person here on this day, but, like, deep down inside, when everything is, like, over and you're just, like, alone with yourself, you're really just like, am I even, like, Muslim? Like, what like, is it just, what does that even mean to me? Is it just in name? Is it just because I'm too afraid to, like, explore other shit type thing? You know what I mean? But, like, now I've resolved it enough to be like, it's not that, being that faith part, it's not what I thought it was when I was, like, 8 years old. It's just, like, something completely different. So I'm not as stressed about it. And it's kind of funny. Like, I went to Pakistan. I've been a couple times in the past few years. Most recently in January of 2020, right before COVID. And I remember I was walking around with my uncle, my mamu, and he it was like time for either Asr or Maghrib or one of the prayers, and he sort of assumed that I like wouldn't. And over there you can just, there's masjids everywhere, you can just pray anywhere. And well, if you're a man, let me say that you can pray. So he just, we had like lunch or something, and he was like, oh, I'm gonna go pray, but you don't have to come, like just thinking that I wouldn't want to go. And I was like, no, I'll come with you, and I'll do it. And I realized in that moment that like, it's not such a big deal over there. It's just a thing you do. Whereas here, for me, still going into a masjid, you know, like even if it's on Eid or whatever, I just have never felt particularly at home there. But I mean, I also realized another friend of mine, Ahmed, who's the host of that See Something, Say Something show, he once, you know, talked about how for him, like moving to New York and finding a masjid, that's where he like found faith for himself, when it was like, no, this is like what it can look like for me. I haven't necessarily like found that level of it for myself, but you know what I mean? Like it wasn't in the moment that I was like with my mamu, like it was cool, and I just did it, and like I just like went on with the rest of my day, and I didn't have to like think at like an epic level, like what does this mean? Does this mean like I'm like a great Muslim now, or like am I going to go home and, you know, like pray every day or whatever? And
no, it's interesting, you know. And I don't know, I've had this conversation with people before, and it's always interesting when it's people who when you compare people who grow up in like a more of a like a Muslim country compared to, you know, the quote unquote the West, right? And oftentimes you've got people who like take their Muslimness and like make it their defining characteristic in the West, or you've got people who are like you said, right, where it's like, oh, I grew up Muslim, and like they try to distance themselves a little bit from it, right? Whereas in those more Muslim countries, it's just a thing that happens as well as everything else that happens within the country. You know what I mean? So it's not overly surprising that, you know, I don't know. I just feel like it does become a bit more of a common thread here, especially with people who are in more pioneering industries, for lack of a better word, that like that identity becomes so much more prevalent in what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's just, whether you want it or not, you're going to become identified in some way by your faith because of that.
It also makes me wonder too, like how much of like my faith, your faith, like as like a first generation kid here kind of thing, like I wonder like how much of my faith is colored by the community that I'm a part of. Because when I think about like people who have distanced themselves, oftentimes it's from like trauma from the community, like they are not accepted
100%,
for who they
100%.
are within the community here. So that's very interesting.
For sure.
No, for sure. I think it's very colored by the community that I grew up with, you know, as I said, the Pakistani upper and I like to say that upper middle class Pakistani community of Boston, because it leaves out a whole swath of people, you know.
Well, you know what? And it's like, that's not to make this about us, but within the Mosquers, that's like a big realization that we even had over the years, right? Is that our target demographic within the Muslim community, if you will, was like a very small sliver of the fact that there is, you know, a big Black Muslim population that we had yet to tap into, that there was a massive, you know, Southeast Asian Muslim population, not just South Asian Muslim population. There was, you know, there's indigenous Muslims that we have yet to actually have like any sort of real connection with. And like, so, you know, and then there's like different sects within Islam. Like, so, you know, that's a big component of it too, is that like we are far from that small sliver that we think. And
it's kind of weird, right? Because it's this thing that, like, I don't know, when you would get excited as a kid learning that somebody famous was Muslim, right? Automatically you're like, oh, man, man. But honestly, maybe you don't have anything in common, really.
Could be. I don't know. Although we had Latif Nasser a couple of weeks ago, and as soon as Sophia found out,
I'm such a fan.
Oh, he's awesome.
Yeah,
but as soon as Sophia found out that he was Yeah, as soon as Sophia found out that he was a smiley and Sophia's also a smiley, they had like a moment. They were like,
Amazing.
we are part of the club. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to listen to that episode. Full disclosure, I listened to Abdullah's episode just to prep a little bit for this to get your vibe, but I'm going to definitely check that one out too.
Yeah, he's
what
awesome.
was our vibe? What would you say you'd describe our vibe as?
Just that you like. I remember you asked him about like his favorite drummer, and I was like, all right, okay, this is gonna be a good time. So hell yeah.
I was so happy with that response because Chad Smith is definitely my favorite drummer. And I was
also like, right before he said it, I was like, I know he's going to say Chad from 311. I know he's going to say Chad from 311. And then he said and I was like, I knew it.
It was Chad from the Chili Peppers. He also said Chad from 311.
That's right.
He did say both.
He first said Chad, but then he was like, hey, I like 311 because I know that because me and him used to listen to that shit together. So.
I mean, 311 Sublime, that was great.
Yeah,
that was good stuff.
Yeah. We got the fact check from Asif as well, who's like, guys, he said both. So
yeah.
both Chads were mentioned for the record.
Yeah.
We've got that good fact check going. So I guess another question that I kind of had was in one of your interviews, you kind of mentioned like that people of color like have more power now than they've had in previous generations to tell their own stories or to like kind of share our own, like speak our own narratives. And so I wonder, like, do you think that like the power comes from barriers being fewer or are they just different? And like,
so, again, this is just my observation. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Now, I remember, for example, being a kid in the 90s, my favorite shows were Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Family Matters, right? All black shows about black families. But they were still, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were still kind of like, I don't want to say like white gazy or like sister or like, it's not that these things didn't like exist. It's just that in terms of like what they were maybe positioned in opposition to, it just was like a smaller, whatever pool of stuff. I hope I'm not getting some of these facts wrong. In terms of, I guess, like quote unquote Muslim, quote unquote brown stuff, there really wasn't a whole lot going on from what I can remember. I think that, you take a show like Rami, I could never have imagined that as a kid. Even when we started, I mean, even 10 years ago, I never could have imagined a show like that. I never could have. So I think that like something has changed. I think also there's just a lot more stuff out there, like it's not as much about like watching, one of, even on cable, maybe one of like 40 channels, now like people can kind of like make shit and just like put it out there. So I think that has presented a lot more opportunity to just like make cool shit yourself. That being said, like, I mean, I'm a newer actor, so I mean, I've only been really seriously pursuing it for, I would say, 3 or 4 years. I'm in Boston, not gonna lie, there's not that many, opportunity. I still get some pretty questionable auditions, a lot, and I'm in a place now where luckily, like, I have a lot going on in life that I don't, say yes to everything anymore and stuff. But I'm definitely like, now that I feel comfortable putting that out about myself, because I've been for so long just like, Kominas, musician. And now people are like, oh, you do that too. And so like now I feel like I'm reaching out more and I'm getting to do some interesting things. But like, like I just did a small film in New York about gentrification, which was like the first film that I ever did in New York. And again, it's like an indie, like whatever, but it was like a cool experience for me. So being on that set, being directed by like a woman of color, like that's like a pretty big deal to me. I think that it's still not the norm by far. Yeah. So, I mean, my first audition, I joked with Riz about this one time. This was like in 2015. They were doing a film about, naturally, the Boston Marathon bombing. So there was actually 2 films that they did about that. And at the time I was in a theater troupe here in Boston, which focuses on storytellers that are in recovery. So it's called they were formerly called improbable players. Now they're called second act. But anyway, all the actors are in recovery, and you do, it was somewhere to kind of like gain confidence on the stage and stuff. And so we would go to middle schools and high schools, do these, pretty short plays, and then have like a talk back with students where we'd share our own stories. I remember once an Iraqi girl stood up. She hadn't understood anything that I said, but she had her translator come tell me afterwards that just the fact that I heard you say something about Muslim was amazing to me. This was in like a middle school, but I was in this audition. It was for again, like a cab driver role. And I didn't initially, when my friend asked me to come and read for it, I said like, what about me makes you think that like I would go and like read for something like that? And then it was like, I've never done this before. And I just saw that episode of Master of None about Indian actors. And I just kind of wanted to see how awful it was. Like, there was no way I was going to do it. You know what I mean? Like, I just was like, I just kind of need to see this shit for myself. I'd never been in a casting session ever before. And so I went there, and it was, 4 white casting folks here in Boston. And they basically first thing, you pick up the sides. My friend was like, can you do a Pakistani accent? That's why she asked me to do the audition. And I showed up. It says Arab cab driver.
Oh my
so she comes out. I'm like, so I don't think these people know the difference. But I think I know what I hate to say that I know what I think they want. And what am I supposed to? She's like, just do whatever you think. And then I do the thing, and it's awful. I feel disgusting. And they're laughing, and they're like, oh, could you just do something a little more Egyptian? And again, I'm sure you have heard these stories millions of times. I'm not trying to people have done these but yeah, I think that hopefully now, for example, there's the Muslim Casting Association. Serena, I forgot her last name, is spearheading that. There's this really cool effort from the Pillars Fund to just be like, we're literally going to give people money to make shit. And we're going to have this panel of incredible judges pick the best one. I mean, this is stuff that I could never have imagined 10, 15 years ago. So I want to say, I mean, entertainment is still hard. You still have to hustle to do it. But I do think it's pretty incredible that finally whoever we are, are seizing that for ourselves and just making the kind of shit that we want to do. Because that's kind of what we did with the Kominas, honestly. We just made the music that we wanted to make, and the people that needed to hear it kind of found us.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I remember 5-10 years ago when it came to that, that content for us, right? And again, whatever us means, it was, it was you guys with the Kominas and Sweatshop Boys. And it was music, but it was very niche music for specific circles and specific people,
even
right?
I mean, first meeting Riz for the first we met right when his song Post 9/11 Blues came out. We actually we met at the ISNA convention in 2006 in Chicago, and just seeing that video, I remember being like, whoa, somebody else is saying this kind of shit. This is amazing.
But I wonder if now people are, and we've had conversations with MPAC Hollywood Bureau and people in sort of more of the industry about this. And I wonder if people are just starting to realize that this is also marketable. You know what I mean? That same story, the same trope, the same garbage that has been pushed out for the last 15, 20 years. People are sick of it, right? And there's more diverse stories that people Rami or even Mindy's new show on Netflix, they're marketable. They're well critically acclaimed.
Dude,
they've got an audience.
If I'm honest with you, I didn't watch Rami until a white coworker who literally has a copy of a Bill O'Reilly book in her office asked me if I had seen Rami.
That's amazing.
I will never this. And I was, I ended up, when I got sober, I did get a master's in community psychology, and I worked in for this company that did work in addiction and prison reform and different stuff for a couple of years. And I remember one of my, in the first couple of months at the office, I'm not gonna say her name, but she came in and she just, again, because I'm the brown dude in the office, was like, have you seen that show, Rami? And I was like, no, but people have been telling me to watch it. And that's kind of like, I went home and then, yeah.
That's wild.
So you're right.
That's wild.
It's totally marketable.
And to move on to your other creative ventures here, Koy, I know we've already taken up so much of your time, but
no, this is a pleasure. We're just hanging out.
No,
I'm having a blast. I'm basically
great.
sleeping over at my parents' house tonight because I took my dad's super old Toyota Highlander to my mechanic because it'll pass inspection that way. So I'm just delaying. I'm just chilling with you guys. So
we've all got a guy. That's perfect.
Yeah, I'm having.
But so King of the World podcast, which spoiler alert for those who haven't figured it out, is your name, Shahjehan.
Yes, Shahjehan.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. How did it come about, and why was it important for you to do this particular project?
Yeah, so it came about, I want to say at the perfect kind of next chapter of my life. It was the end of this very last difficult year that a lot of us had. I think left a lot of us like questioning things. And, I was in not by no means a dead end job, a great job that I just didn't like. And I was not feeling creatively fulfilled. It may surprise you to learn that the Kominas was never really a financially viable enterprise. I mean, we were able to we broke even for the last 5 years, which is pretty good. But so a childhood friend of mine, Asad Butt, we grew up in the same community. We weren't like best friends. He was a few years older than me, but our parents are really tight and stuff. So anyway, he'd been kind of like following what I was doing. He was super into journalism, and then he left and kind of had a career in venture capital and stuff, but he always wanted to get back to journalism type stuff. So he started this media company, Rafelion, last year. And he had in order to kind of just have a test sort of a show, he has this other show called American Muslim Project, which is more of kind of like what we're doing, like an interview format show. He had me as, I believe, his second guest on the show. And at the end of our interview, he was like, yo, like I'm at this weird point. I've started this new thing. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I kind of want you to be a part of it. So how would you like to host your own show? And I was like, dude, I am literally about to quit my job. I don't know like what I'm going to do next. I was actually driving on the weekends. My wife suggested that, she was like, dude, you are very unhappy. Why don't you literally just drive a van on the weekends for Amazon? I don't ever want to work for Amazon again for other ethical reasons, but they did help me sort this part of my life out, where I drove a van on the weekends, and I was listening to podcasts, and I was like happier than I ever was, like just doing something physical that was whatever. So in that time, Asad approached me with the idea to like host my own show. We started tossing around different ideas. As I said, I think at the beginning of our interview here, I wasn't crazy about like the 9/11 thing, but we talked about it in terms of like my unique take on it. Asad originally had envisioned it as more of a news style show, but as soon as we started kind of fleshing out like as you have heard, my pretty, nuts kind of life that I've had, we were like, what if we had me host it and followed the national and international timeline of the post 9/11 world, but in the timeline of my life. So as I was like dropping out of college, as I was first finishing high school, because the first episode is literally about that day. As I was then, dropping out of college, struggling with mental health, starting the Kominas, doing all this stuff, and do that sort of side by side with talking to different, different people, like historical experts, actors, bloggers and journalists, and even folks that were like unfortunately victims of like or survivors of hate crime survivors. We just started doing it. So I formally started working on it February of this year, and it's just been like maybe the most incredible experience of my life up to this point. Just like being given the opportunity to do something like this and having like a team of people supporting me, It's like, yeah, I mean, my name is on the show, but it's not like me at all. It's the whole company that's like helping and co-producing the whole thing. And at the end of the day, I'm really proud of it. We really all are, because you never know until you hear the end product. Like just like a song, you're worried about like, oh, am I gonna not like the mix on this or whatever? But like the response, has just been overwhelmingly positive. Like it's just in terms of everything from the nerdy stuff I'm psyched about, which is like, no, the production is solid and like all the sounds are good, to the stuff that really means, like hearing from people in high school that I wouldn't have thought, obviously my friends, but like people that I haven't talked to in years, hearing from like people in the community, man. Like over the weekend was Asad's wedding reception. So they got married and then COVID happened, but it was his Boston wedding reception. And I can't tell you how many of those same aunties and uncles that I always thought I was like the worst kid in the community came up to me and said, thank you. This one auntie, she came up to me and said, if I had known any of this, I would have had your back from day one. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for saying the things that none of us like knew how to say, and it's been quite a while that I have sort of been the kid in the local Desi community that like the parents will send, the problematic kid to be like, hey, Shahjehan did some bad shit. You should just go talk to him. Maybe. But I'm just like overwhelmed. Like, I mean, I could
That's
cry.
Amazing.
Like, so it's, and again, it's a DIY, not DIY, but yeah, it's DIY labor of love. We're not like on Spotify or, I mean, the podcast is everywhere, but we're not like a big company. We're just trying to get this thing off the ground. It's all like super underground, word of mouth, emailing, posting and all that stuff, and trying my best to like, I'm so bad at social media. I literally have a meeting tomorrow with one of our interns. She's going to help me figure all this shit out because I'm just so bad. It's hard for me to partition social, like responsible, productive social media use from just the mindless scrolling, FOMO inducing, feeling bad about yourself thing that it can become. I haven't figured that one out yet. So I'm trying.
You and me both, man.
Yeah, same here. If you have tips later, please.
I'll let you know. But yeah, the show's called King of the World, and I'm really, really, really super proud of it. I think it's been unbelievable.
And it's a 7-part series. Is that correct?
Yeah, 7 parts. So tomorrow, today's Monday. So Wednesday, episode 3 will be coming out. So there'll be a new episode every Wednesday until my birthday, October 13th. I think we'll probably have a couple of bonus episodes. We're also going to be having a couple of live events. We're still kind of figuring out exactly how that works. The other cool thing I'll say about it real quick is each episode has an episode guide on this platform called Satori, which one of my coworkers, Mona Baloch, has put together, where you can kind of like follow. You can follow along in the show and kind of see like on a little timeline. You can see like photos of me, getting that first guitar, or like a photo of my dad, or like a photo of like the minivan that we all rode around in, this like Ford Windstar. So each episode has one of these really, really, and it's meant for more educational stuff. Like Asad has a background in ed tech and stuff, but I've actually, a lot of people have told me that it's just a cool way to kind of like listen to the episode and see something else in it.
Cool. That's a really creative idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We're going to start doing that
to everybody else. Yeah.
We're going to start doing that with like Sophia and my timelines as we talk together.
It's
like
cool,
this
honestly.
Is sitting in my closet. Yeah.
I didn't realize how cool it would be initially when we were first talking about it, but it's pretty awesome.
That's incredible. That's awesome. Amazing. Shahjehan, thank you so much for your time. Before we fully wrap up here, we like to do some rapid fire questions. Do you have a few more minutes for us?
Absolutely. Let me just take a sip of this water here.
Yeah, hydrate for the sporting event that is about to take place. So we'll just ask you some questions. First thing that comes to mind. So the first one is a movie or TV show that traumatized you as a child.
Oh God. David Lynch, Mulholland Drive.
Ooh, okay.
Ooh, what about it?
I was gonna say.
So I can say why. Oh, and I've since watched it. It's not scary at all.
Yeah.
But there's this one scene where like this dude just, and I think it's a very badly portrayed Indigenous person or something. Just sort of. So okay, I'm gonna like hop out of frame for a second. Like someone turns a corner and he just sort of comes in like this, and then he like goes back. Then he like goes back behind the wall, and that scared the shit out of me. So, yeah.
All right, I gotta go find that clip. That sounds scary even today.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, most rewatched movie.
Home Alone. Or
the first one?
Pet Detective. Home Alone 1. Yeah.
Solid question.
Yeah.
Both solid.
Yeah.
Both solid.
Love it. The most expensive thing you've ever broken.
The most my father's car. When I was 16, I destroyed the like Volvo 760 turbo intercooler, which was gonna be my car, because I was speeding on the way back to my math class, and it was snowing.
At least it was for a good reason, you know?
Yeah.
I totaled it. Yeah.
You're just like, I just was trying to get to math, man.
Math class? There's worse things you could have been doing than going to math class.
You're right.
So,
Yeah, I think that has to be it.
Right on. Okay, number 4. If you could only listen to one album for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh my God, are you really going to ask me that? DJ Shadow, Introducing.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. And then finally, what is your favorite way to eat potatoes? So like mashed, scalloped, chips, fries, like what's your
any
jam?
way that my mom makes them.
Oh, okay.
Because my mom
That's a great answer.
And I'm literally going to go right now and have them. So, yeah.
Do you know how she's prepared them this evening?
Yeah, I mean, she does a really good like aloo keema thing. She's also really good with eggplant bangan. Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm a fan of sweet potatoes when I'm trying to be like healthier and stuff. So I do this. My mom believes it's an abomination because I got it from the New York Times, but it's like a sweet potato and like red dal recipe. I think it's pretty good.
That sounds good.
I make it in a pressure cooker. It's like is
sweet potato actually healthier, or is this like something we just tell ourselves?
I don't know. I think it may be something we just tell ourselves, but
I'm okay with that. But I'm okay with that because
I have read again from the internet, like who knows what we're reading. You know, that either that their one is not healthier than the other. But I don't know. What were you going to say? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I feel like it is healthier because I just know my nana would always eat half a sweet potato and like he knew things, you know. I don't know, so I feel like there had to be a reason.
Nana wisdom.
Yeah, you know that old nana wisdom. He had it, so.
Yeah.
So if Sophia's nana said it, it must be true.
Then it's facts.
Sounds right to me. Yeah.
Amazing. Shahjehan, thank you again so much for your time. This was an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you and your work?
Sure. So you can find King of the World anywhere you get your podcasts. Just type in King of the World podcast or find it on Apple or Spotify or Stitcher. As far as my stuff, you can find I have a website now, so that means I'm a real person, I guess.
That's official.
Shahjehankhan.com. And on that, you can find all the links to everything. And then Instagram, it's just and then Shahjestan. Same with, I just recently made a Twitter. I don't really have anybody on there. Like, just forgive me.
We're going to get you some followers.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then
our
obviously,
whole board, at least 30.
Definitely. And then Kominas were on Twitter, the real Kominas, because I don't know, one time somebody tried this. I don't know. I don't even remember why that's a thing. But then also I just started playing with a great band in Providence, fronted by another Pakistani American dude, Rafe Rashid. The band is called Ravi Shavi. And I'm really pretty super excited about it. We're actually working on a bunch of new music.
Amazing.
And hopefully I'm going to be in a horror movie this weekend. I'm pretty excited about that.
What?
So I'm pretty excited.
Are
Yeah,
you
it's like a
you the
local-
person that peeks out from behind the wall?
No,
or like
I'm
what's
This is
your
full circle. This is full circle.
I am one of the three. It's about a girl that goes on a series of bad dates, and I'm the best of the three.
that is a horror movie?
I think it's implied that maybe I die at the end, but I'm not sure. So
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Well,
Do we know what this
we will
project
look
is
out for
called?
that.
It's called Penny. I'll send you some info about it or whatever.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Halal Gap. Stay tuned for more episodes. The Halal Gap is a Mosquers production. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok by searching Mosquers Film Festival. Thank you to our sound and video editor, Arish Jamil, our tile artist, Narmeen Syed, and our producer, Asif Qureshi. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. On behalf of Sophia and myself, thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next time.